The heart monitor's steady beeping was the only sound keeping me company when I realized my daughter had made her choice. After 3 days of silence following my triple bypass surgery, I understood that the $340,000 I'd invested in her life meant nothing compared to her resentment. What she didn't know was that this hospital bed would become her worst nightmare because I was about to show her exactly what abandonment really costs. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in room 314 buzzed constantly, a mechanical symphony that had become the soundtrack to my revelation. Tuesday morning brought the same routine: nurses checking vitals, doctors reviewing charts, and my phone sitting silent on the bedside table. No calls from Emma, no texts asking about my recovery, no flowers, no visits, no acknowledgment that her father had nearly died on an operating table. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the small holes in each square while processing what 3 days of complete silence really meant. Emma knew about the surgery. Her stepmother, Rebecca, had called her personally, explaining the emergency, the risks, the fact that I'd specifically asked for her during the moments when they weren't sure I'd survive the procedure. Rebecca had even offered to pay for Emma's flight from Portland to Boston, covering any expenses that might prevent her from being here. Emma's response had been clinical, detached. "Tell Walter I hope everything goes well. I'll call when I can." That was 72 hours ago. No follow-up call, no check-in with Rebecca, no attempt to reach the hospital directly. Nothing. The morning Rebecca appeared in my doorway, her usually perfect composure cracked with exhaustion and something approaching anger. She'd been splitting time between the hospital and managing my business obligations, handling everything I couldn't while recovering from major cardiac surgery. "Walter, we need to talk," she said, settling into the uncomfortable vinyl chair that had become her second home. Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent days trying to find diplomatic ways to discuss the undiscussable. "About Emma's absence?" I asked, though we both knew that was exactly what needed discussing. Rebecca pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages with the systematic precision she brought to everything. "I've called her 6 times since Sunday, sent detailed updates about your condition, your progress, visiting hours, everything. She's read every message, Walter. The delivery receipts show she's seen them all." The confirmation hit differently than the assumption had. Knowing Emma was choosing not to respond was worse than hoping she simply hadn't received the information. This was deliberate exclusion, calculated indifference to my well-being during the most vulnerable period of my life. "What exactly did she say when you first called her?" I asked, needing to understand the complete scope of her rejection. Rebecca's hesitation told me everything before she spoke. She said she was dealing with some personal things and couldn't travel right now. When I offered to cover all expenses, she said money wasn't the issue. When I explained that you'd asked for her specifically, she said that was emotional manipulation. Emotional manipulation. The phrase settled in my chest like a physical weight. Wanting your daughter present during life-threatening surgery was now emotional manipulation? 26 years of supporting her dreams, paying for her education, funding her business ventures, covering her mistakes, and my desire for family connection during a medical crisis was manipulative behavior. "There's more," Rebecca continued, her fingers tightening around her phone. "I found her social media posts from the weekend." She showed me Emma's Instagram story from Saturday night. Emma raising a martini glass at some trendy Portland restaurant, laughing with friends, the timestamp showing exactly when she'd received Rebecca's call about my emergency surgery. Sunday brought a hiking trip with her boyfriend Marcus, beautiful mountain views with captions about living authentically and choosing peace over family drama. Monday featured a professional photo shoot for her graphic design business, Emma posing confidently with the caption, "Building my empire, one project at a time." The contrast was devastating. While I was connected to machines that monitored my heart's struggle to maintain rhythm, Emma was building her empire and choosing peace over family drama. While surgical teams worked to repair arteries that had nearly killed me, she was living authentically by completely ignoring my existence. Rebecca set her phone aside and looked directly at me. "Walter, I've watched you support her for over a decade. The apartment in Portland you bought her, the graphic design equipment, the business loan you provided with no repayment schedule, the graduate school tuition. I've watched you give and give, always hoping for some recognition, some appreciation, some basic human decency in return." She was right, of course. The financial support had been substantial and consistent. Emma's apartment in Portland's trendy Pearl District purchased outright for $280,000 when she decided she needed to live somewhere that inspired creativity. The professional graphic design setup that cost $45,000, including software licenses, high-end computers, cameras, and printing equipment. Graduate school at Portland State for her MFA, another $65,000 over 2 years. The business loan of $75,000 to launch her design studio, structured with generous terms and no pressure for repayment. Every dollar had been given freely, motivated by genuine desire to see Emma succeed and happiness to have the resources to support her dreams. I'd never used money as leverage, never threatened to withdraw support during our disagreements, never made her feel indebted or obligated. The financial assistance came with only one expectation: basic respect for our relationship. "She's 31 years old," I said, processing the complete picture of Emma's choices. "Old enough to understand that actions have consequences." Rebecca nodded slowly. "Old enough to understand that deliberately ignoring your father's emergency surgery sends a clear message about your priorities." The social worker arrived that afternoon, a kind woman named Patricia, whose job involved helping patients navigate family dynamics during medical crises. She'd been making rounds, checking on patients who seemed isolated or struggling with family-related stress during recovery. "Mr. Harrison, how are you feeling today? The nursing staff mentioned you haven't had many visitors." "My wife has been here constantly. I'm handling everything perfectly." "And other family members?" The question hung in the air between us. Patricia had obviously reviewed my records, knew I had an adult daughter listed as emergency contact, had probably noticed the absence of anyone matching that description during her previous visits to my room. "My daughter lives in Portland. She's busy with her business." Patricia's expression suggested she'd heard similar explanations many times before, families creating diplomatic narratives to explain abandonment during medical emergencies. Her job required navigating these situations with delicate professionalism while providing emotional support to patients dealing with family rejection. "Sometimes major medical events create stress for family members too," she said carefully. "People respond differently to fear and uncertainty." "Is that what you call it when someone completely ignores their father's emergency surgery?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but the diplomatic euphemisms were becoming insufferable. Patricia's professional composure remained intact, but her eyes showed understanding. "Have you had direct communication with your daughter since the surgery?" "None. My wife has sent detailed updates about my condition. Emma has read every message and chosen not to respond." "That must be very difficult for you during your recovery." The understatement was almost comical. Difficult, as if having your only child demonstrate complete indifference to your near-death experience was merely difficult, like traffic congestion or bad weather. This was betrayal on a fundamental level, the destruction of assumptions I'd held about family bonds and basic human compassion. "Patricia, in your experience, when adult children completely abandon elderly parents during medical crises, what usually motivates that behavior?" She considered the question carefully, probably weighing professional protocols against honest assessment. "Sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's unresolved conflict, sometimes it's a pattern of prioritizing personal convenience over family obligation. And in cases where the parent has provided substantial financial support over many years, that can complicate things. Some adult children resent financial assistance because it makes them feel obligated. Others take it for granted and lose sight of the sacrifice involved." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, Patricia providing perspective on family dynamics during medical crises while I processed Emma's behavior through new frameworks. By the time she left, I understood something important. Emma's absence wasn't about fear or confusion or inability to travel. It was about priorities and character, about what she valued and what she considered disposable. Rebecca returned that evening with dinner from the Mediterranean place I'd mentioned wanting to try. Real food instead of hospital meals. Thoughtful consideration for small pleasures during an unpleasant experience. The contrast between Rebecca's constant care and Emma's complete absence couldn't have been more stark. "I've been thinking about something all day," Rebecca said, settling back into her chair with her own dinner. "Emma's response to your surgery tells us something important about who she is as a person." I looked up from my meal, curious about her analysis. If someone you care about is having emergency surgery, you drop everything. You don't check your schedule, you don't weigh the inconvenience, you don't consider whether you feel like dealing with family obligations, you go. The fact that Emma didn't even call to check on you tells us everything we need to know about her character. Rebecca was right. This wasn't about logistics or communication difficulties or misunderstandings. This was about fundamental values, about what Emma considered important enough to disrupt her comfortable life. Apparently, her father's survival didn't make the list. "Walter, I've watched you excuse her behavior for years. Every missed birthday, every canceled visit, every time she's prioritized her social life over family commitments. You've made allowances because you love her and because you want to maintain the relationship. But love requires some basic reciprocity." The words stung because they were accurate. I had been making excuses, creating generous interpretations for Emma's consistent self-centeredness, hoping that maturity would eventually teach her to value our relationship. Instead, her selfishness had calcified into something approaching cruelty. "What are you suggesting?" Rebecca set down her fork and looked at me with the directness that had attracted me to her 10 years ago. "I'm suggesting that people who abandon you during medical emergencies have shown you exactly what you mean to them, and maybe it's time to respond accordingly." The idea settled into my mind like a seed in fertile ground. For years, I'd maintained the financial support and emotional investment in Emma's life despite receiving minimal consideration in return. I justified the one-sided relationship by telling myself she was building her career, finding herself, dealing with the complexities of modern life. But emergency surgery had provided perfect clarity about her priorities. If Emma could ignore my medical crisis, what exactly was I supporting? What kind of person takes hundreds of thousands of dollars from someone they can't be bothered to check on during emergency surgery? What did it say about someone's character that they would post social media content about living authentically while their father was connected to life support machines? Thursday morning brought Dr. Martinez with discharge paperwork and follow-up instructions. My recovery was progressing well, cardiac function improving, all indicators pointing towards successful long-term outcomes. The physical healing was excellent. The emotional healing would require different strategies. "Mr. Harrison, you'll need to avoid strenuous activity for several weeks, but you can resume normal cognitive activities immediately. Office work, financial planning, legal consultations, all fine as long as you're not lifting heavy objects or overexerting yourself." Legal consultations. The phrase caught my attention with unexpected relevance. I had legal matters that needed attention, documents that required updating, financial structures that needed reviewing in light of recent revelations about family priorities. Rebecca helped me dress and gather my belongings, the simple act of putting on regular clothes feeling symbolic after days in hospital gowns. As we prepared to leave room 314, I took one last look at the bedside table where my phone had sat silent for 4 days. Emma's absence during my medical crisis had taught me something valuable about loyalty and priorities and the true nature of our relationship. The drive home through Boston traffic felt different somehow, like returning to a world where I now possessed important information I'd previously lacked. Emma had shown me exactly what I meant to her. Now it was time to show her exactly what her choices would cost. Our house in Beacon Hill looked exactly as we'd left it Sunday morning when Rebecca had raced me to the emergency room. The morning newspaper still sat on the kitchen counter, coffee mugs in the sink from the breakfast we'd never finished. Everything preserved exactly as it was before I learned what near-death experiences reveal about family loyalty. Rebecca settled me into my study, the room where I'd handled business affairs for 15 years. Oak desk, organized filing cabinets, everything in its proper place. The room felt different now, like a command center rather than just an office. I had work to do that couldn't wait for full physical recovery. "Walter, what exactly are you planning?" Rebecca asked, noting the way I'd immediately moved toward my filing cabinets.
I'm planning to treat Emma exactly the way she's treated me. I opened the cabinet drawer labeled Family Financial Records and withdrew the thick folder that contained every document related to Emma's financial support over the past decade. Property deeds, loan agreements, account statements, gift documentation, everything meticulously organized because proper record-keeping had been essential to my success in commercial real estate. The Portland apartment purchase agreement showed the property titled in Emma's name alone, purchased with $280,000 from my account as a gift to support her independence. The business loan documentation revealed $75,000 transferred to Emma's business account with extremely generous terms. No set repayment schedule, no collateral required, interest rate below market value. My accountant had structured it as a family loan rather than a gift for tax purposes, but I'd never pressed Emma for payments. Rebecca reviewed the documents over my shoulder, her understanding of legal and financial matters making her assessment immediate and accurate. "Walter, this is all legally recoverable if you choose to pursue it. Even the apartment? The business loan, absolutely. You have signed agreements, clear terms, documentation of the transfer. What about the apartment purchase?" Charles studied the property documents carefully. "This is more complex because it was structured as a gift rather than a loan. However, there's legal precedent for recovering gifts given under false pretenses or to recipients who later demonstrate fundamental breach of familial obligations." He pulled out a thick legal reference book, flipping to marked pages about family financial law. Courts have ruled that extraordinary gifts given with the expectation of maintaining family relationships can be recovered when recipients demonstrate willful abandonment of those relationships. Would Emma's behavior during my medical emergency qualify as willful abandonment? Absolutely. Refusing to visit or even contact a parent during emergency surgery while continuing to accept financial benefits demonstrates clear abandonment of familial obligations. No court would view her behavior as acceptable. Charles outlined the legal process: formal demand letters for business loan repayment, legal action to recover the apartment if she refused voluntary return, removal from credit card accounts, revocation of any financial guarantees or support structures I'd provided. "Walter, this is going to be emotionally difficult for Emma, but legally straightforward. She has no independent assets, no way to repay the loans without returning the apartment. Her business depends on equipment purchased with your loan money. She's made herself completely financially dependent on your generosity while demonstrating that you mean nothing to her." The irony was perfect. Emma had rejected me personally while remaining entirely dependent on me financially. She'd tried to have it both ways, taking my money while treating me as irrelevant to her life. That arrangement was about to end. Friday afternoon brought Charles Morrison to my study, his efficient briefcase and serious demeanor indicating he'd spent time reviewing family law related to financial recovery. Charles had handled difficult family situations before, had seen how medical emergencies and family crises reveal true character and priorities. "Walter, I've reviewed the preliminary information Rebecca provided. Tell me exactly what happened during your surgery and recovery." I walked him through the timeline: emergency surgery on Sunday, Rebecca's immediate calls to Emma, Emma's dismissive response, 4 days of complete silence despite detailed updates about my condition, social media posts showing Emma's active social life during my recovery period.
Charles took notes on his legal pad, asking clarifying questions about communication attempts, Emma's acknowledgment of messages, any extenuating circumstances that might explain her absence. The facts were straightforward and damning. Emma had chosen to ignore her father's medical crisis while continuing to benefit from his financial support. From a legal standpoint, this establishes a clear pattern of taking financial benefits while refusing basic familial obligations, Charles said, reviewing my documentation. The business loan is completely recoverable. You have signed agreements, clear terms, documentation of the transfer. What about the apartment purchase? Charles studied the property documents carefully. This is more complex because it was structured as a gift rather than a loan. However, there's legal precedent for recovering gifts given under false pretenses or to recipients who later demonstrate fundamental breach of familial obligations. He pulled out a thick legal reference book, flipping to marked pages about family financial law. Courts have ruled that extraordinary gifts given with the expectation of maintaining family relationships can be recovered when recipients demonstrate willful abandonment of those relationships. Would Emma's behavior during my medical emergency qualify as willful abandonment? Absolutely. Refusing to visit or even contact a parent during emergency surgery while continuing to accept financial benefits demonstrates clear abandonment of familial obligations. No court would view her behavior as acceptable. Charles outlined the legal process: formal demand letters for business loan repayment, legal action to recover the apartment purchase if she refused voluntary return, removal from credit card accounts, revocation of any financial guarantees were support structures I'd provided. Walter, this is going to be emotionally difficult for Emma, but legally straightforward. She has no independent assets, no way to repay the loans without returning the apartment. Her business depends on equipment purchased with your loan money. She's made herself completely financially dependent on your generosity while demonstrating that you mean nothing to her. The irony was perfect. Emma had rejected me personally while remaining entirely dependent on me financially. She'd tried to have it both ways, taking my money while treating me as irrelevant to her life. That arrangement was about to end.
How long does the legal process typically take? For the business loan, 30 days from formal demand. If she doesn't repay, we file for collection and asset seizure. The apartment recovery could take 3 to 6 months, depending on whether she contests it. Charles gathered his materials and prepared comprehensive legal documents. By Monday, Emma would receive formal notice that her comfortable life built on my generosity was ending. Her choices during my medical crisis had consequences she hadn't considered. Rebecca walked Charles to the door while I remained in my study, surrounded by evidence of years of one-sided generosity that had been repaid with complete indifference to my well-being. Emma thought she could take my money while treating me as disposable. She was about to learn how wrong she was. That evening, Rebecca and I sat in our living room, the fireplace creating warmth and comfort that stood in stark contrast to the cold calculation required for family financial restructuring. The house felt peaceful in a way it hadn't for years, as if removing toxic family dynamics had improved the actual atmosphere. Walter, how do you think Emma will respond when she receives the legal documents? I considered the question while watching flames dance in the fireplace. She'll be shocked first, then angry, then desperate. She's never faced consequences for treating people badly. This will be educational for her. Do you think she'll try to contact you directly? Probably, but only after she realizes the legal action is serious and isn't going away. Emma has never contacted me unless she wanted something. Why would that change now? Rebecca curled up beside me on the sofa, the physical closeness feeling especially meaningful after days in the hospital. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. Emma has taken advantage of your generosity for too long. As we sat together in comfortable silence, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete peace about family relationships. No more wondering if Emma appreciated my support, no more hoping she'd eventually demonstrate basic consideration for our relationship, no more accepting minimal effort in exchange for maximum financial assistance. Emma had shown me exactly what I meant to her during the most vulnerable period of my life. Now she would learn exactly what her choices cost.
Justice wasn't always dramatic or complicated. Sometimes it was simply treating people exactly the way they treated you. The weekend passed quietly, focused on physical recovery and emotional adjustment to my new understanding of family priorities. Sunday morning brought the realization that exactly 1 week ago, I'd been rushed to emergency surgery while Emma was raising martini glasses and living authentically without giving my survival a second thought. Monday would begin a new chapter where Emma's financial dependence on me would finally match her demonstrated level of personal investment in our relationship. Absolutely zero. Monday morning arrived with the efficiency of business operations, precise timing that had characterized my entire career in commercial real estate. Charles Morrison's legal documents lay organized on my desk, each page representing years of misplaced generosity transformed into recoverable debts. The certified mail envelopes sat ready for courier delivery, addressed to Emma's Pearl District apartment that I had purchased for her comfort and independence. The first envelope contained the business loan demand notice, $75,000 plus accumulated interest payable within 30 days. The second held credit card termination documents, effective immediately upon receipt. The third included apartment ownership transfer requirements based on legal precedent for gift recovery when recipients demonstrate fundamental breach of familial obligations. Emma would receive all three simultaneously, creating the complete picture of her financial dependence on someone she couldn't be bothered to contact during emergency surgery. Rebecca brought coffee to my study, her morning routine adapted to accommodate my cardiac recovery while maintaining the systematic approach required for family financial restructuring. She'd spent Sunday reviewing Emma's social media posts, documenting the timeline of her activities during my hospitalization for potential court evidence. The courier service confirmed delivery for before noon, Rebecca said, settling into the chair across from my desk. Emma should receive everything by early afternoon Portland time. I imagined Emma's day progressing normally until the moment she signed for certified mail from a Boston law firm. Her graphic design business operated from the apartment I'd purchased, using equipment bought with my loan money, servicing clients she'd acquired through networking events funded by my credit cards. Her comfortable life existed entirely because of my financial foundation, yet she demonstrated that my actual well-being was irrelevant to her existence. Charles included his direct phone number in each document. I continued, reviewing the legal paperwork one final time. When Emma realizes the scope of what's happening, she'll probably want immediate legal consultation. Do you think she'll call you first? The question touched on something I'd been considering since my hospital revelation. Emma has never called me unless she wanted something. Money, advice about major purchases, connections for her business. She certainly didn't call when I was connected to life support machines. Why would she start now unless she needs something? Rebecca's expression showed the same understanding that had been building throughout our conversations. Emma's relationship with me had always been transactional, based on what I could provide rather than genuine connection or mutual care. Emergency surgery had simply revealed the true nature of our dynamic with perfect clarity. My phone rang at precisely 11:30, the caller ID showing Emma's number for the first time in 8 months. She'd received the documents faster than expected, probably because Monday morning delivery in Portland's Pearl District was efficient for certified mail requiring signature confirmation. I let the phone ring 4 times before answering, my voice carrying the same measured tone I'd used for decades of business negotiations. "Hello, Emma." "Dad, what the hell is this?" Her voice cracked with panic and disbelief. "I just received legal documents saying you want $75,000 and you're trying to take my apartment?" "I received legal documents too, Emma. Hospital discharge papers after emergency surgery that you couldn't be bothered to acknowledge." Silence stretched between us, broken only by her rapid breathing that suggested she was beginning to understand the scope of her situation. "Dad, I was dealing with some personal things. I couldn't just drop everything and fly to Boston." "Personal things? Like the hiking trip with Marcus that you posted on Instagram while I was in intensive care? Or the restaurant visits you documented while my heart was being surgically repaired? You were checking my social media?"
The accusation carried indignation that would have been amusing if it weren't so perfectly representative of Emma's inverted priorities. She was angry that I'd noticed her public social media posts, not ashamed that those posts revealed her complete indifference to my medical crisis. That's not what those posts were about. What were they about, Emma? Explain to me how posting about living authentically while ignoring your father's life-threatening surgery represents authentic living. Another silence, this one longer and more desperate. When Emma spoke again, her voice had shifted from indignation to something approaching negotiation. Dad, look, I know I should have called sooner.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I was scared about the surgery and didn't know what to say. But these legal documents are insane. You can't take away my apartment and my business. I'm not taking anything away. I'm collecting on documented loans and recovering property purchased for someone who has demonstrated that I mean nothing to them. I never said you meant nothing to me. You didn't need to say it, Emma. You demonstrated it perfectly by ignoring my emergency surgery while continuing to use my credit cards for your social life. I pulled up her credit card statements on my computer, the charges from the past week creating a timeline of her priorities. Let's see. While I was having triple bypass surgery, you charged $127 at that trendy restaurant in Nob Hill. While I was in intensive care, you spent $89 at the spa. While I was wondering if my only child cared whether I lived or died, you charged $234 for new clothes. Each itemized charge landed like evidence in a criminal trial. Emma's financial dependence on me had continued seamlessly, while she treated my survival as irrelevant to her life. The credit card statements documented her true priorities with mathematical precision. Dad, please, let's talk about this reasonably. Reasonably, like the reasonable way you handled my medical emergency? I made a mistake. I should have called sooner, but you can't destroy my life over one mistake. One mistake? Emma, ignoring your father's emergency surgery isn't a mistake. It's a character revelation. It shows exactly what kind of person you are and exactly what our relationship means to you. Her breathing became more rapid, probably as she began calculating what losing the apartment and business equipment would mean for her comfortable Portland lifestyle. Emma had never faced consequences for her self-centered behavior, had never been forced to consider how her choices affected other people. What do you want from me? An apology? I'm sorry I didn't handle the surgery news well. I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. What will it take to fix this? Fix this? Emma, you can't fix abandonment with apologies. You can only live with the consequences of your choices. So you're going to financially destroy me because I didn't visit you in the hospital? The reframing was typical Emma, reducing calculated indifference during my medical crisis to simply not visiting, as if the issue was geographic inconvenience rather than fundamental character failure. She'd ignored every attempt at communication, shown complete indifference to my survival, and continued living her comfortable life on my money while treating me as disposable. I'm going to treat you exactly the way you treated me, as someone whose needs and feelings don't matter. Dad, that's not fair. I was dealing with my own issues. What issues, Emma? What personal crisis was so overwhelming that you couldn't spare 30 seconds to text asking about my recovery? Silence again, because there were no personal issues that justified her behavior. Emma had been living her normal life, posting on social media, going to restaurants, enjoying spa treatments, building her empire. The only issue had been her complete lack of interest in my well-being. I want to make this right, she said finally, her voice shifting toward desperation. Tell me what you need from me. I need exactly what you've already given me. Nothing. The legal documents reflect our actual relationship dynamic perfectly. Dad, please, we can work this out. We can rebuild our relationship. Rebuild it with what foundation? Emma, you've shown me exactly what I mean to you. Why would I invest more time and money in someone who couldn't be bothered to check if I survived surgery? The call ended with Emma crying and promising to call back, though I suspected her next call would be to the lawyer whose number Charles had included in the legal documents. Emma's tears weren't about guilt or genuine remorse. They were about facing consequences for choices she'd made without considering potential costs. Rebecca appeared in my study doorway, having listened to enough of the conversation to understand Emma's response. How did she sound? Shocked that actions have consequences, angry that her comfortable life is being disrupted, desperate to negotiate her way out of accountability. No actual remorse about ignoring your surgery? None. Her primary concern is protecting her apartment and business, not acknowledging that abandoning your father during medical emergencies might be morally problematic. I turned back to my computer and opened Emma's credit card account management page. With a few clicks, I removed her authorization for all 3 cards, effective immediately. Any charges she attempted after today would be declined, ending her access to my financial resources while she figured out how to respond to legal debt collection. The satisfaction felt clean and appropriate. Emma wanted to live independently from our family relationship while remaining financially dependent on my support. That contradiction was ending today. Independence meant taking responsibility for your own expenses, especially when you demonstrated that family relationships held no value for you. Tuesday brought the predicted phone call from Emma's hastily retained Portland attorney, a young lawyer named Jennifer Walsh, whose primary practice involved tenant rights and small business disputes. She was clearly out of her depth with family financial law, but Emma had probably hired the first attorney who would take her call. "Mr. Harrison, this is Jennifer Walsh representing Emma Harrison. I'm calling about the legal documents she received regarding family loans and property issues." Jennifer's voice carried the careful professionalism of someone trying to sound more confident than she felt. Charles had warned me that Emma would probably hire local counsel who might not understand the strength of our legal position.
Walsh, you can direct all legal communication to my attorney, Charles Morrison. His contact information was included in every document your client received. Mr. Harrison, I was hoping we could discuss this matter directly. Emma is very distressed about these proceedings and would like to work out some kind of arrangement. Miss Walsh, Emma had the opportunity to work out arrangements when she chose to ignore my emergency surgery. The time for family discussions ended when she demonstrated that I was irrelevant to her life. Sir, surely there's some misunderstanding about Emma's response to your medical situation. There's no misunderstanding. Emma received detailed information about my surgery and recovery. She chose not to respond, not to visit, not to call. Meanwhile, she continued using my credit cards for her social activities. The evidence is documented and clear. Jennifer's pause suggested she was beginning to understand that Emma's version of events might not align with the actual facts. Mr. Harrison, what would it take to resolve this matter without extended litigation? Complete repayment of all documented loans within 30 days. Return of the apartment property to my ownership. Acknowledgment that family financial support comes with basic expectations of human decency. That's not financially possible for Emma. She can't repay $75,000 immediately, and the apartment is her primary residence and business location. Then Emma should have considered those factors before demonstrating that our family relationship meant nothing to her. Choices have consequences, Miss Walsh. Could we arrange some kind of payment plan for the business loan? I had anticipated this question and discussed it with Charles. Payment plans were possible, but would require Emma to acknowledge the debt, accept responsibility for her behavior, and demonstrate genuine commitment to family relationship repair. Given her complete lack of remorse during yesterday's call, payment plans seemed inappropriate. Mr. Walsh, payment plans are for people who acknowledge their debts and show good faith about family relationships. Emma has demonstrated neither. Mr. Harrison, losing her apartment and business would be devastating for Emma's future. Emma found my potential death insufficiently important to merit a phone call. Why should her future be more important to me than my survival was to her? The question hung in the air without response because there was no response. Emma had established the precedent that family well-being was irrelevant to her life decisions. I was simply applying the same standard in return. I'll need to discuss options with my client and get back to you. Miss Walsh, all communication should go through Charles Morrison. And please inform your client that her credit card authorizations have been terminated. She'll need to fund her legal fees independently. After hanging up, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from systematic problem solving. Emma's attorney had quickly understood the weakness of her client's position. The financial documentation was clear, the legal precedent was strong, and Emma's behavior during my medical crisis made her completely unsympathetic to any court that might review the case. Rebecca brought lunch to my study, allowing me to continue organizing documentation while maintaining the rest required for cardiac recovery. The physical act of reviewing financial records felt therapeutic, transforming years of unappreciated generosity into concrete legal actions that would restore appropriate balance to our relationship. Walter, Charles called while you were on the phone with Emma's lawyer. He wants to schedule a follow-up meeting this week to discuss strategy for the apartment recovery. Good. I want this resolved quickly. Emma has had 3 decades to learn how to treat people with basic decency. If she hasn't figured it out by now, extended legal proceedings won't teach her. Wednesday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Marcus Chen, Emma's boyfriend of 2 years, appeared at our front door with the nervous energy of someone attempting a diplomatic mission he was unqualified to handle. Rebecca answered the door and escorted him to my study, where he sat uncomfortably in the chair normally occupied by legal and financial professionals. Marcus was 34, worked in Portland's tech industry, and had always seemed pleasant during the few times I'd met him. He'd never asked me for money or favors, had appeared genuinely fond of Emma, and had struck me as someone with reasonable character and judgment. His presence suggested Emma had enlisted him for emotional manipulation since legal strategies weren't working. "Mr. Harrison, I hope you're feeling better after your surgery." Marcus began, his discomfort obvious but his concern apparently genuine. "Thank you, Marcus. I'm recovering well physically. Sir, I wanted to talk to you about Emma and the legal situation. She's really struggling with everything that's happening." I leaned back in my chair, curious about what Emma had told Marcus about the situation and whether she'd provided him with accurate information about her behavior during my medical crisis. "Marcus, what exactly has Emma told you about why she's facing legal action? She said you're upset because she didn't visit you in the hospital, and now you want to take away her apartment and business." The simplified version was typical Emma, reducing calculated abandonment during medical emergency to merely not visiting, omitting the complete lack of communication, the social media posts showing her active social life during my recovery, the continued use of my credit cards while ignoring my existence. Is that the complete story she provided? Marcus's hesitation suggested he suspected there might be more to the situation. "She said you were angry about family issues and taking it out on her financially." Marcus, let me give you the actual timeline. Emma received detailed calls about my emergency surgery. She was offered paid transportation to Boston. She chose not to come, not to call, not to respond to updates about my condition. Meanwhile, she posted on social media about living authentically and continued using my credit cards for restaurants and social activities. Marcus's expression shifted as he processed information Emma had apparently omitted from her version of events. She didn't mention the communication attempts or the social media posts. Emma ignored every attempt to inform her about my condition while publicly documenting her active social life. She demonstrated that my survival was irrelevant to her existence while continuing to benefit from my financial support. "Mr. Harrison, Emma told me she was scared about your surgery and didn't know how to handle it."
Marcus, how would you handle it if someone you cared about was having emergency surgery? The question was rhetorical because the answer was obvious. People who care about each other respond to medical crises with concern and communication, not indifference and social media posts about authentic living. "I'd probably drop everything and go to the hospital," Marcus admitted quietly. Exactly. The fact that Emma didn't even call tells you everything you need to know about what I mean to her. Marcus sat silently for several minutes, probably reconciling Emma's story with the information I'd provided. Finally, he looked up with something approaching understanding. "Mr. Harrison, what can Emma do to fix this situation?" "Nothing. Emma made her choice when she ignored my medical crisis. Now she lives with the consequences." "Sir, losing her apartment and business would destroy everything she's built. Emma destroyed our relationship when she showed me I was irrelevant to her life.
Why should her needs be more important to me than mine were to her? Marcus had no answer because there was no answer. Emma had established that family well-being was unimportant to her decision-making. I was simply applying the same standard in return. Is there any way she could earn back your trust? The question touched on something I'd been considering since my hospital revelation. Trust required consistency over time, demonstrated commitment to relationship repair, acknowledgment of wrongdoing, and genuine remorse. Emma had shown none of these qualities during our phone conversation or through Marcus's diplomatic mission. Marcus, trust is earned through actions, not words. Emma has had 31 years to demonstrate basic consideration for our relationship. If she hasn't learned by now, what makes you think she'll change? Maybe this situation will teach her what's really important. Maybe. But I'm not risking more time and money hoping Emma will develop character traits she's never shown interest in acquiring. Marcus gathered himself to leave, his diplomatic mission clearly unsuccessful, but perhaps educational about the woman he'd been dating. Mr. Harrison, I hope you'll consider giving Emma another chance someday. Marcus, I gave Emma every chance for 3 decades. She chose to waste them all. After he left, I reflected on the conversation and what it revealed about Emma's approach to problem-solving. Rather than accepting responsibility for her behavior or demonstrating genuine remorse, she'd enlisted her boyfriend for emotional manipulation. The strategy was typically Emma: avoid accountability while recruiting others to fix problems created by her own choices. Thursday brought a call from Charles Morrison with updates about Emma's legal response. Jennifer Walsh had filed preliminary objections to the debt collection and apartment recovery, arguing that family gifts couldn't be recovered and that business loans between relatives were unenforceable. The objections were predictable, but legally weak given our documentation and Emma's behavior during my medical crisis. Walter, their arguments are exactly what I expected from an inexperienced attorney. They're claiming the apartment was a gift that can't be recovered, but they're ignoring the legal precedent for gift recovery when recipients breach fundamental family obligations. What about the business loan? They're arguing it was structured too informally to be legally binding, but we have signed agreements, bank transfer records, and documentation of the loan terms. It's completely enforceable. Charles explained that Emma's legal strategy appeared to be delay and hope for settlement, rather than genuine defense of her position. Jennifer Walsh was probably advising Emma that the ultimate legal outcome was unfavorable, but that extended litigation might pressure me to accept partial recovery rather than pursue complete collection. How long will the court proceedings take? If they don't settle, probably 4 to 6 months for complete resolution. But Walter, I don't think Emma can afford extended litigation. Her attorney fees will exceed any potential savings from fighting the collection. Good. Let her spend money she doesn't have defending behavior that's legally and morally indefensible. There's one more thing. Jennifer Walsh indicated Emma might be willing to repay the business loan if you'll allow her to keep the apartment. I considered the offer while reviewing the documentation spread across my desk. Partial recovery would provide some financial compensation, but wouldn't address the fundamental issue: Emma's complete lack of respect for our relationship and her willingness to abandon me during medical crises while maintaining financial dependence. Charles, accepting partial settlement sends the wrong message. It tells Emma that abandoning family members during medical emergencies carries minimal consequences as long as you negotiate effectively afterward. So, you want to pursue complete recovery? I want Emma to face the full cost of her choices. She made herself completely financially dependent on someone she couldn't be bothered to check on during emergency surgery. That level of selfishness deserves complete consequences. Friday afternoon brought the phone call I've been expecting since Monday. Emma's voice carried the desperation of someone who'd finally calculated the true cost of her choices and realized that legal objections weren't going to protect her comfortable lifestyle. Dad, I've been thinking about everything all week. I know I messed up with the surgery situation, and I want to make it right. The opening was more promising than our previous conversation, suggesting Emma was beginning to understand that token apologies wouldn't resolve legal debt collection. However, her phrasing still minimized calculated abandonment during medical emergency to merely messing up, avoiding full acknowledgment of what her behavior revealed about her character. Emma, what exactly do you think you messed up? I should have called you sooner after Rebecca contacted me about the surgery. I should have checked on your recovery more often. The response was still inadequate, focusing on timing rather than fundamental failure to demonstrate basic human decency during my medical crisis. Emma, the issue isn't timing. The issue is that you chose to ignore my emergency surgery while continuing to use my credit cards for your social life. That demonstrates what kind of person you are and what our relationship means to you. Dad, I was scared and confused. I didn't know how to handle the situation. How did Marcus say he would handle it? Silence, because Emma knew exactly how any decent person would handle learning about their father's emergency surgery. The fact that she'd chosen differently revealed everything about her character and priorities. I made a mistake, and I'm sorry, but destroying my life won't undo what happened. I'm not destroying your life, Emma. I'm collecting debts from someone who has demonstrated that I mean nothing to them. If losing the apartment and business destroys your life, maybe you should have considered that before abandoning your father during medical emergency. What can I do to fix this? I'll pay back the business loan. I'll visit you more often. I'll be a better daughter. The offers came out in desperate succession, promises made under pressure rather than genuine commitment to relationship repair. Emma was negotiating to protect her assets rather than acknowledging fundamental character problems that had created this situation. Emma, you're 31 years old. If you haven't learned how to be a decent daughter by now, what makes you think you'll change? This situation has taught me what's really important. I realize I took your support for granted. You took my support for granted while treating me as irrelevant to your existence. That's not something you learn to change, Emma. That's something you either are or aren't as a human being. Her crying intensified, but I suspected the tears were about losing her comfortable lifestyle rather than genuine remorse about family relationship failure. Emma had never faced consequences for her selfishness and was struggling to accept that her choices had finally caught up with her. Dad, please, I'll do anything to make this right. You had the opportunity to do the right thing when I was having emergency surgery. You chose to ignore it. Now you live with that choice. I can't lose my apartment and my business. Everything I've built will be gone. Emma, you built everything with my money while demonstrating that I was unimportant to your life. Why should you keep what I paid for when you've shown that our relationship means nothing to you? The call ended with more promises and pleading, but no genuine acknowledgement of what her behavior revealed about her character. Emma was focused on minimizing consequences rather than understanding why her choices during my medical crisis were fundamentally unacceptable. Saturday morning brought quiet satisfaction as I reviewed the week's progress. Emma had attempted multiple strategies: direct negotiation, legal objections, diplomatic intervention through Marcus, and desperate pleading. None had addressed the fundamental issue: her complete indifference to my well-being during medical emergency while maintaining financial dependence on my support. Rebecca and I spent the afternoon organizing my study, filing the documentation that would support complete asset recovery while clearing space for the investment research I wanted to pursue during cardiac recovery. The physical act of organizing felt symbolic, creating order from the chaos Emma had brought to our family relationships. Walter, how are you feeling about everything that's happened this week? Relieved. For the first time in years, I understand exactly what our relationship actually is, rather than hoping it might become something different. Do you think Emma will eventually accept responsibility for her behavior? I considered the question while reviewing Emma's responses throughout the week. Every conversation had focused on minimizing consequences rather than acknowledging wrongdoing. Every negotiation attempt had tried to preserve her financial benefits while avoiding accountability for abandoning me during medical crisis. Emma will accept responsibility when accepting responsibility serves her interests. Right now, she's focused on protecting her assets rather than understanding what kind of person abandons their father during emergency surgery. What if she changes? What if losing everything teaches her to value family relationships? Then she'll have learned an important lesson that will benefit her future relationships. But I'm not investing more time and money hoping Emma will develop character traits she's never shown interest in acquiring. Rebecca nodded with understanding that came from years of watching Emma take my generosity for granted while providing minimal consideration in return. Emergency surgery had simply revealed the extreme extent of Emma's selfishness. With perfect clarity, you deserve family relationships based on mutual care and respect, not financial dependence and emotional indifference. That evening, I sat in my study reviewing the legal timeline Charles had provided. Within 60 days, Emma would either voluntarily return the apartment and repay the business loan or face court-ordered asset seizure and formal debt collection. The legal machinery was grinding forward with the same systematic efficiency I'd brought to commercial real estate for 30 years. Emma had made her choice when she ignored my medical crisis while living comfortably on my financial foundation. Now she would live with the consequences of valuing her social life more than her father's survival. Justice wasn't always complicated. Sometimes it was simply treating people exactly the way they treated you. The March winds carried the scent of change through Boston's financial district as I walked towards Charles Morrison's office building, my cardiac recovery complete enough to handle the stairs to his 20th floor practice. Today marked the 60-day deadline for Emma's voluntary compliance with debt collection, and her failure to meet the terms had triggered automatic court proceedings for asset seizure and formal judgment. Charles greeted me at his office door with the satisfaction of a man who'd orchestrated a flawless legal victory. The conference table held organized stacks of documentation, court filings, asset valuation reports, sheriff's department coordination schedules, everything required for systematic recovery of property from someone who demonstrated that family relationships meant nothing to them. Walter, the court granted our motion for expedited proceedings based on Emma's clear breach of loan agreements and the documented abandonment during your medical emergency, Charles announced, settling behind his desk with obvious professional satisfaction. Judge Patterson called her behavior during your surgery unconscionable and noted that family relationships carry reciprocal obligations that Emma had completely ignored. The legal validation felt deeply satisfying. An objective third party had reviewed Emma's choices and reached the same conclusion. Abandoning your father during emergency surgery while continuing to benefit from his financial support was morally and legally unacceptable behavior that warranted complete consequences. What's the timeline for asset recovery? Charles opened his calendar and pointed to several marked dates. The Portland apartment sale is scheduled for March 15th. Sheriff's Department will oversee Emma's relocation and ensure she removes personal belongings before the property transfer. The graphic design equipment purchased with your loan money will be seized on March 18th for auction to satisfy the business debt. I reviewed the court documents that would restore ownership of property I'd purchased for someone who couldn't be bothered to check if I'd survived surgery. The apartment in Portland's Pearl District would sell quickly in the current market, probably for more than the original $280,000 purchase price, providing complete recovery of that investment, plus appreciation. Emma's attorney filed a final appeal yesterday, Charles continued, arguing that the court proceedings were too harsh for what she called a family misunderstanding. Judge Patterson denied it within hours, noting that emergency surgery abandonment wasn't a misunderstanding, but a character revelation that warranted appropriate legal consequences. The judicial system had seen through Emma's attempts to minimize calculated indifference during medical crisis to mere family misunderstanding. Courts dealt with family financial disputes regularly and could distinguish between genuine relationship difficulties and fundamental character failures that justify asset recovery. Where is Emma living now? According to our process server, she's staying with friends in Portland while trying to find affordable housing. The credit card terminations and business equipment seizure have eliminated her income stream, so she's limited to whatever employment she can find with her MFA in graphic design.
The image of Emma reduced to temporary accommodations and job searching felt like natural consequences flowing from natural choices. She'd built her comfortable lifestyle entirely on my financial foundation, while treating me as irrelevant to her existence. When that foundation was removed, the lifestyle collapsed accordingly. Has she attempted any further contact? Charles pulled out a folder containing copies of emails Emma had sent to his office, each more desperate than the previous, as she'd realized that legal objections weren't protecting her from accountability. The progression showed someone finally understanding that abandoning family members during medical emergencies carried serious long-term consequences. She sent 14 emails over the past month, offering everything from partial repayment plans to promises about future family involvement.
The last email arrived yesterday, asking if you'd consider maintaining the apartment ownership but allowing her to continue living there rent-free. The final proposal perfectly encapsulated Emma's fundamental misunderstanding of our situation. Even facing complete asset seizure, she still thought our relationship was a negotiation where she could minimize consequences through strategic offers. She'd never acknowledged that abandoning your father during emergency surgery revealed character flaws that couldn't be fixed through financial arrangements. Charles, people who ignore their father's emergency surgery while posting social media content about living authentically don't suddenly develop character through losing court battles. Emma's proposals are about protecting her lifestyle, not understanding what kind of person abandons family during medical crises. I agree completely. Her emails focus entirely on minimizing financial consequences rather than acknowledging the behavioral patterns that created this situation. I signed the final documents authorizing complete asset recovery and formal closure of all financial relationships with Emma. The legal machinery would now proceed without requiring additional input from me, systematically collecting everything I'd provided to someone who demonstrated that my well-being was irrelevant to her life decisions. Walking back through Boston's financial district felt different somehow, lighter, as if removing toxic family dynamics had improved my actual physical health beyond the cardiac surgery recovery. For the first time in years, I wasn't hoping Emma would eventually appreciate my generosity or demonstrate basic consideration for our relationship. Those hopes had been permanently resolved through her choices during my medical crisis. Rebecca was waiting in our Beacon Hill living room with afternoon tea and the satisfied expression of someone who'd watched justice prevail through systematic legal action. The house felt peaceful in a way it hadn't for years, as if family relationship clarity had improved the actual atmosphere of our home environment. How did the meeting with Charles go? Complete victory. Emma loses everything within 2 weeks, and all financial connections between us are permanently severed. Rebecca curled up beside me on the sofa, the physical closeness feeling especially meaningful after months of emotional distance created by Emma's consistent selfishness and ingratitude. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself instead of continuing to enable her behavior. Emma taught me something valuable about the difference between family relationships based on mutual care versus financial dependence. Some people prove themselves worthy of trust and support through their actions. Others prove themselves unworthy through theirs. The evening brought phone calls from family members who'd heard about the legal proceedings through mutual connections in Boston's close-knit professional community. Most expressed support for my decisions, having witnessed Emma's treatment of me over the years and understanding that emergency surgery abandonment was simply the extreme manifestation of long-standing character problems. My cousin Margaret called from her law firm with professional perspective on family financial recovery cases. Walter, I've handled similar situations where adult children take financial support for granted while providing minimal consideration in return. Your documentation and Emma's behavior during your surgery make this one of the clearest cases I've seen. Margaret, what typically happens to people like Emma after they face consequences for treating family members badly? Some learn from the experience and develop better relationship skills. Others become bitter and blame everyone except themselves for problems created by their own choices. Based on Emma's responses during the legal proceedings, I suspect she falls into the second category. The assessment aligned with my observations of Emma's behavior throughout the court process. Every communication had focused on minimizing consequences rather than acknowledging wrongdoing, suggesting someone who viewed accountability as unfair punishment rather than natural results of personal choices. Either way, Walter, you've protected yourself from continuing to fund someone who treats you badly. That's always the right decision, regardless of how they respond. Margaret was correct. Whether Emma learned from losing everything or continued blaming others for her problems was irrelevant to my well-being. I'd removed myself from the cycle of unappreciated generosity and conditional family relationships that had characterized our dynamic for years. The final week of March brought systematic completion of asset recovery with the efficiency of legal machinery operating at peak performance. Emma's Portland apartment sold within 3 days of listing, the buyer paying $295,000 for property I'd purchased at $280,000, providing complete recovery plus market appreciation. The graphic design equipment auction netted $52,000 toward the $75,000 business loan, with the remaining balance satisfied through garnishment of Emma's employment income for the next 18 months. Charles delivered the final accounting on March 30th, his legal satisfaction evident as he presented documentation showing complete financial separation and successful debt collection. Every dollar I'd invested in Emma's comfortable lifestyle had been recovered through systematic legal action, plus court costs and attorney fees that doubled the ultimate cost of her choices during my medical crisis. Walter, this represents one of the most complete family financial recoveries I've handled in 20 years of practice. Emma's behavior during your surgery made the legal case straightforward, and her attempts to negotiate after abandoning you only strengthened our position. The financial recovery felt satisfying, but the emotional clarity was even more valuable. For years, I'd wondered if Emma appreciated my support or valued our relationship beyond what I could provide financially. Emergency surgery had answered those questions with perfect precision. I meant nothing to her beyond my utility as a funding source for her comfortable lifestyle. What happens to Emma now? According to her attorney, she's moved back to Cleveland to live with relatives while looking for steady employment. The graphic design business collapsed when she lost the equipment, and her credit score prevents independent apartment rentals. She's essentially starting over at 31 with no assets and significant debt. The consequences were severe but directly proportional to her choices. Emma had abandoned her father during emergency surgery while maintaining financial dependence on his support. Losing everything she'd built with my money was the natural result of demonstrating that family relationships meant nothing to her. Has she made any attempts at genuine reconciliation? Charles reviewed his files one final time. Her last communication was an email sent through her attorney claiming you'd destroyed her life over a misunderstanding and threatening to contact other family members to expose your vindictive behavior toward your own daughter. The threat was typically Emma, attempting to manipulate family members into pressuring me to restore her financial support by portraying herself as a victim of unreasonable paternal expectations. She'd never acknowledged that abandoning your father during medical emergency might justify serious consequences. Charles, any family members who side with someone who ignores emergency surgery while living on the patient's money aren't people whose opinions matter to me. I agree. Emma's final response tells you everything about whether she learned anything from this experience. That evening, Rebecca and I celebrated the completion of family financial restructuring with dinner at the Italian restaurant I'd mentioned wanting to try during my hospital recovery. The meal felt symbolic somehow, representing new beginnings based on relationships with people who actually valued my company rather than just my financial resources. Walter, how does it feel to have complete resolution of the Emma situation? I considered the question while reviewing everything that had happened since my emergency surgery 4 months ago. Peaceful. For the first time in years, I understand exactly what our relationship was rather than hoping it might become something different. Do you think you'll ever hear from her again? Only if she needs something. Emma has never contacted me unless she wanted money, advice, or connections. That pattern won't change now that she's lost access to my financial support. The recognition felt liberating rather than sad.
Emma had taught me valuable lessons about the difference between genuine family relationships and financial dependence arrangements disguised as family bonds. Some people prove themselves worthy of trust and support through consistent demonstration of mutual care and respect. Others prove themselves unworthy through choices that reveal their true character and priorities. Rebecca, I've learned something important about the difference between family by blood and family by choice. Emma happens to be related to me genetically, but she's never chosen to value our relationship beyond what I could provide financially. What about people who choose to be family through their actions rather than just genetic accident? I looked at Rebecca, whose constant presence during my medical crisis and unwavering support during the legal proceedings had demonstrated exactly what family relationships should look like when built on mutual care rather than financial obligation. Those are the relationships worth investing in. People who show up during medical emergencies, who provide emotional support during difficult decisions, who value your well-being as much as their own. The conversation continued over dinner, touching on plans for travel, investment opportunities, community involvement, all the activities I'd neglected while hoping Emma would eventually appreciate my generosity or demonstrate basic consideration for our relationship.
Emergency surgery had freed me from those misplaced hopes by revealing the truth about her character and priorities. Walking home through Beacon Hill that evening, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from resolving long-standing problems through decisive action. Emma had made her choice when she ignored my medical crisis while living comfortably on my financial foundation. The legal consequences were simply the natural result of her decisions, implemented through proper channels with complete documentation and professional oversight. April brought new routines focused on activities I enjoyed rather than family obligations I'd hoped might eventually be reciprocated. Investment meetings with David Chen about commercial real estate opportunities, hiking club membership that provided social connection with people who shared my interests, community theater involvement that Rebecca and I could enjoy together. The phone number for Boston's senior singles community remained unused on my desk, but knowing it was available felt significant. At 62, building new relationships based on mutual interest rather than family obligation seemed both possible and appealing. Emma had taught me that blood relationships without genuine care and respect were ultimately hollow compared to chosen relationships built on shared values and consistent consideration. My calendar filled with activities chosen for personal enjoyment rather than family management responsibilities. Theater tickets with Rebecca, hiking trails with the outdoor club, business dinners with professional colleagues who valued conversation and companionship for its own sake rather than just access to financial resources. Life became simpler when focused on relationships with people who actually wanted to spend time with me rather than just access my financial resources. May brought an unexpected letter forwarded from Emma's Cleveland address. The handwriting was familiar but shaky, suggesting emotional distress and financial pressure had affected even her careful penmanship. I opened it at my kitchen table while drinking morning coffee purchased without considering anyone else's preferences or financial situation. Dad, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know I'm working 2 jobs now and slowly getting my life back together. Living with my aunt's family has taught me things about gratitude and family relationships that I never understood before. I realize now that I took your support for granted and treated you terribly when you needed me most. I'm not asking for money or help, just wanted you to know that I understand what I lost when I chose my convenience over your well-being during your surgery. I hope someday you can forgive me, even though I know I don't deserve it. Emma. I read the letter twice, looking for signs of the manipulation and strategic positioning that had characterized Emma's previous communications. But desperation and genuine hardship had apparently stripped away pretense, leaving what appeared to be authentic recognition of her choices and their consequences. The letter represented exactly what I'd hoped to see during the legal proceedings: acknowledgment of wrongdoing, understanding of how her behavior had affected me, acceptance of responsibility without attempting to minimize or excuse her actions. However, the recognition had come only after facing complete consequences for her choices, raising questions about whether the insight was genuine or motivated by loss of comfortable lifestyle. Rebecca found me in the kitchen, still holding Emma's letter and considering appropriate responses to someone who'd finally acknowledged abandoning their father during medical emergency. What does she say? She acknowledges taking my support for granted and treating me badly when I needed her most, claims to understand what she lost when she chose convenience over my well-being. How do you feel about receiving that acknowledgement? I folded the letter and set it aside while considering the question. Satisfied that she finally understands what her behavior revealed about her character, but recognition that comes only after losing everything feels less meaningful than recognition that prevents bad behavior in the first place. Do you think she's genuinely changed? Emma has learned that abandoning family during medical crises carries serious financial consequences. Whether she's learned to actually value family relationships remains to be seen. The distinction was important. Emma had faced accountability for her choices and developed understanding about how her actions affected other people. But understanding consequences wasn't the same as developing genuine care and consideration for family relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. Are you planning to respond to her letter? I considered the question while reviewing everything that had happened since my emergency surgery. Emma had made her choice when she ignored my medical crisis while living on my financial support. The legal consequences had restored appropriate balance to our relationship by removing her access to resources she'd taken for granted while treating me as irrelevant. I'm planning to file the letter with the other documentation from this experience. Emma has learned an important lesson about accountability and consequences. Whether that lesson translates into better treatment of people in her future relationships is her responsibility, not mine. The decision felt appropriate and final. Emma had received exactly what she'd given me during my medical crisis: nothing. The legal proceedings had taught her that family financial support carried expectations of basic human decency that she'd ignored at significant cost. Whether she applied those lessons to future relationships was her choice to make independently. June brought the satisfaction of systematic completion as I organized my study to reflect new priorities and cleared space for investment research I wanted to pursue during full cardiac recovery. The filing cabinet that had held Emma's financial documentation now contained materials for commercial real estate opportunities, travel planning, and community involvement activities chosen for personal enjoyment rather than family obligation management. Rebecca and I spent the summer developing new routines based on shared interests rather than crisis management and emotional labor required by maintaining relationships with people who took generosity for granted while providing minimal consideration in return. Theater subscriptions, hiking group membership, dinner parties with friends who valued conversation and companionship for its own sake rather than just access to financial resources. The house felt different somehow, lighter and more peaceful, as if removing toxic family dynamics had improved the actual air quality and acoustic properties of our living space. For the first time in years, I was planning activities based on what I wanted to do rather than what family members expected me to provide or fund or support. My calendar filled with possibilities chosen for genuine interest rather than obligation. Investment meetings that challenged my mind, hiking trails that provided physical activity and social connection, travel plans that Rebecca and I could enjoy together, without worrying about family members who might feel excluded or demand financial assistance for their own vacation plans. At 62, I was finally free to discover what genuine relationships looked like when built on mutual respect and shared interests rather than financial dependence and conditional appreciation. Emma had taught me valuable lessons about the difference between family by blood and family by choice. The education had been expensive but ultimately worthwhile for the clarity it provided about human nature and relationship dynamics. The adventure of authentic family relationships was just beginning based on what people chose to demonstrate through their actions rather than what genetic accident had created through birth circumstances. Some relationships were worth investing in because they provided mutual care and respect. Others were worth ending because they drained resources while providing nothing meaningful in return. Emma had made her choice when she ignored my emergency surgery while living comfortably on my financial foundation. I had mine by treating her exactly the way she'd treated me during the most vulnerable period of my life. The legal system had validated my position, and the financial recovery had been complete and appropriate. Justice wasn't always complicated or dramatic. Sometimes it was simply removing support from people who demonstrated they didn't deserve it and redirecting resources toward relationships that provided genuine value and mutual consideration. Emma's letter suggested she'd finally learned what her behavior had cost, but learning consequences after losing everything was different from having character that prevents bad behavior in the first place. The distinction would matter for her future relationships, but it was no longer my concern. I had better uses for my time and money than hoping someone would eventually develop character traits they'd never shown interest in acquiring. At 62, life was too short for relationships that required constant hope for improvement rather than consistent demonstration of mutual care and respect. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.